He took in a runaway bride, but her past rode hard on his trail. The night smelled like creosote and blood. Ada Rowan ran blind through the mesquite, wedding veil torn to a ghost of gauze, breath skipping like a stone over a black lake. The moon dragged her shadow across the arroyo, long and thin as a knife. Behind her the rope creaked once twice, where it had swung a lantern from a cottonwood limb. They'd meant it for her. They'd meant to make an example. Boots crunched on gravel not far off, followed by the sound of a match striking. A cone of sulphur light licked the dark, showing the ground where Ada's white hem had left shreds on catclaw. She clutched the little derringer she'd stolen from a drunk card dealer, its pearl handle slick with her sweat. 2 shots only. She'd never fired one. Tonight would teach her or bury her. Wind hissed over the high desert, rattling yucca blades like whispered gossip. If she could reach the old rail spur, there might be a handcar, a mule, a miracle, anything. Her cheeks burned where the veil had whipped her skin. Her right wrist throbbed, raw from the rope burn when she'd slipped the noose while the men argued who'd spring the trap. She didn't know which one had said, "Leave the lantern on, wolves like the light." She only knew his voice had smiled when he said it. A coyote cried. Hoofbeats answered. She dropped flat, blood roaring in her ears. A rider clattered onto the dry creek bed above her, halted and leaned in the saddle. The horse steamed in the cold. The rider lifted the lantern from his pommel and let its light wander. "Ada Rowan," he called pleasantly. "Miss Runaway Bride. Your groom offers pardon if you apologize pretty." He paused, listening to the silence. "Second offers a shorter rope." Ada eased backward, the derringer trembling, the dust cold against her tongue. She tasted iron and fear. Beyond the cottonwoods a black shape waited, an old shed boxy against the moon. When she reached it, she slipped inside and shut the door. The hinges squealed. She breathed once, quieting herself the way her mother had taught her in a thunderstorm. Count, listen, count. Her eyes adjusted to the faint cut of light under the door. Then a hand pressed the latch from the other side. Ada cocked the derringer. The door opened a finger width, then a palm width, then a forearm thrust in, scarred, powerful, not hers. The lantern glow from outside caught a man's jawline, grizzled and set. A gravel low voice said, "If you shoot, make it count. I hate wasted powder." Who was he, and would he turn her in or pull her out of hell? The door yawned wider as his shadow filled the shed, and Ada had to decide whether to trust a stranger or die by familiar hands. "Name's Ezekiel Hart," the stranger said, keeping his hands open. He was mid-40s, maybe older, weathered to the color of saddle leather. Grey threaded his beard. A long duster hung from his shoulders, dusted white at the hem. A puckered scar, thin as lariat cord, tracked from his left ear to his jaw. His eyes were the desert at noon, bleached, unreadable. "I heard men riding stupid and loud. You breaking up a wedding or a lynching?" Ada's throat worked. Both. He nodded, the faintest acknowledgement of a hard truth. "Stay low." He set the lantern on a barrel, thumbed the flame down. "How many?" "3 I saw. Maybe 5. Led by Silas Horn." At the name, Ezekiel's mouth tightened. "Horn runs errands for Baron Reddick," Ada swallowed. "Reddick is the groom. That figures." He motioned to a corner where an old water barrel stood. He kicked the false bottom loose and pulled out a scattergun, wrapped in oiled cloth. "Seems this shed belonged to a man who planned ahead." He broke the shotgun, checked the shells, and snapped it shut. "Me, I prefer forward motion." Outside, the riders murmured. Then a new voice, calm, honeyed, and cold, floated to the shed. "Ada, child," Silas Horn sang. "You do love trouble more than vows. Reddick's shirt still damp with the wine you poured down your wedding dress. Tisk." Ada's breath hitched. She saw it again. The church candles stuttering in a hot wind, Reddick's smile thin as paper, the contract on the altar. Marriage for water rights, her family's well for his empire. When she'd balked, Silas had corrected her with a cuff to the mouth, then tightened a length of rope to teach obedience. Ada had watched the rafters spin. She'd felt the rope kiss her wrist as she fought it. She ran when the pews erupted. Someone knocked the cake, someone laughed, someone cried, and Silas promised to teach her the gentleness of law. What does he get? Ezekiel's voice was quiet. "Everything I am," she said, "and the land under my mother's grave." Outside, boots crunched closer. Silas's men dismounted. The lantern light slid under the door like a blade. Ezekiel stepped between Ada and the light, blocking her with his shadow. "You'll back me if I make a hole," he said, more a statement than a question. "I can count to 2, she whispered, raising the derringer. Silas's knuckles rapped the door, almost polite. "Last offer, miss. Reddick prefers a wife to a warning." Ezekiel's jaw flexed. "Horn," he called, voice carrying like gravel in a pan, "I know your boot print. I know where your left heel drags. You're not the law." "She leaves with me," Silas chuckled. "Ezekiel Hart, old soldier. Blacksmith with a conscience, he polishes more than his shoes. You don't get to decide the county's contracts. Step aside, or I write your name where the priest left space on the funeral ledger." Ezekiel's hand slid to the latch. "Ada," he said, "when the door opens, keep your head down. What are you going to do? Remind a bully what a door is for." The latch clicked, and as the door swung into the night, breath plumed and guns rose, Silas Horn smiling that sermon-quiet smile, Ada's fingers slick on the trigger. Ezekiel moving with a man's old practiced violence. Ezekiel did not step through the doorway so much as break it open with intent. He drove the door wide, wood smacking into the nearest rider, Pike, a rat-eyed man with a scar over his lip. Pike staggered back, misfired into the dark muzzle flash a quick flower. Ezekiel's scattergun roared twice, the twin barrels yawning fire. The first shot shattered the lantern Silas held. The second chewed splinters out of the cottonwood for the next man, Jonah, to dive behind. Night swallowed the light. Men cursed. Horses sidestepped, iron ringing on stone. "Down," Ezekiel said, one hand pushing Ada's shoulder. She dropped and tasted dust as shot peppered the shed's planks. The rope above the wagon tongue swayed, creaking in the sudden wind like a noose remembering a neck. Silas Horn didn't shout. He didn't bluster. He spoke like a schoolmaster. "That was unneighborly, Zeke. Baron Reddick funds roads, schools, which you enjoy, I think." "Reddick funds himself," Ezekiel said. He rebroke the shotgun, fed it, snapped it shut. His movements were clean, economical. A man who had done job and reload in too many places from Apache country to Kansas River fights. "You got 3 more seconds to turn your horses around and give you the girl," Silas said. "She signed a contract." "She didn't sign," Ada whispered fiercely. "He forced my hand onto ink," Silas sighed. "Same as signing. Ask any judge here who eats Reddick's beef." He let the words hang, then said almost kindly, "Hart, I remember your boy. Smallish. Liked marbles. Reddick's school gave him a slate. Shame what fever does." Ezekiel's breath hitched barely enough to notice. Ada did notice. She knew the way men with knives pushed them and watched for flinches. She saw Ezekiel steady himself with a small invisible prayer. His left hand flexed once. "Your mouth," Ezekiel said softly. "Should be more careful with graves." Hooves scraped, Silas shifting his horse. "I'd rather not spoil the night. Give me Ada, and I'll tell Reddick you acted under moon madness." Moonlight edged Ezekiel's hat brim. He looked older now, tired, still upright on a spine woven of wire and regret. "I've seen men hang the wrong person and call it law," he said. "Not tonight." Silas's tone turned to brass. "Men," he said. "Take them!" "I want her breathing." The riders moved. Ezekiel stepped into them like a fence post set in bedrock. His shotgun lifted and spoke. A man yelped and clutched his shoulder. A horse reared, screaming. Ada fired her derringer once, felt the kick burn her palm, and saw a hat snap backward off her head. Then the shotgun clicked empty. A shape loomed through the smoke. A fist descended, brass-knuckled, looking to erase Ezekiel's face. He took it on his forearm, grunted, and answered with an elbow that cracked cartilage. They grappled in the thorn shadows, boots screeching on gravel. Silas remained mounted, invisible but for his voice. "Bind Hart. I'll collect the bride." Ada reached for the door jamb, nails biting wood, terror and anger mixing in her chest like medicine in a mortar. She had run all night. She was tired of running. She snatched a fallen rider's revolver and, untrained, shaking, stepped into the yard as Silas swung his horse toward her, the reins whispering like a snake. The revolver was heavy, its cylinder cold as a winter stone. Ada raised it with both hands. Silas Horn's face eased into view, razor-cheeked, priest-smooth, eyes pale and certain. The horse danced sideways, dust clouding its knees. "Easy," Silas said, voice like a sermon about forgiveness with a noose at the end. "You'll bruise your own soul, miss." "I've got bruises enough," Ada said. "And I'm out of souls to spend." He flicked his wrist. The braided rawhide in his hand lashed out, quicker than her breath, snapping her forearm. Pain bloomed hot. The revolver wobbled. Silas's smile was kindly as he struck again. The whip kissed the old rope burn, and Ada's eyes went white. She fell to one knee. Ezekiel broke free of the tangle with two men and barreled into the third, driving him into the cottonwood. He took a knife across the ribs, short, ugly, then punished the knife man with a headbutt that sent teeth to the dirt. Warmth spilled into his shirt. He tasted copper and grit. He reached for the scattergun, found it kicked away, and drew the revolver on his hip. His hand shook just once, the way it always did when a certain smell in the dust put him back in a different year, a different casualty list. Ada raised her gun again. Silas slid to the far side of his horse, using the animal to shield flesh with flesh. "You won't," he said. "You're good. You were taught to be. Good girls don't shoot men who read the Bible aloud. Good men don't sell women like Wells," she said. A shot cracked. Silas's hat jerked, brim shredding. Ezekiel had fired from where he braced on one knee, blood wetting his side. "He's just a man, Ada," Ezekiel said, steadying his sight on Silas's thigh. "Not a cloud. Not a church. A man who bleeds like we do. Aim at the leg if you can't stomach the kill." "Kill?" Silas mocked, laughter bright. "She'll never. She's a lamb who ran away from the lovely slaughter." Ada's wrist screamed. The whip had cut skin and pride. Something in her buried under years of yes miss and be a lady. Ada stood up. She saw her mother's grave on dry land. Saw Reddick's men staking survey flags like bayonets into her childhood. She leveled the revolver at Silas's horse's shoulder. The horse reared as the shot hit. Silas fell, rolling with the grace of a practiced fighter. He came up low, revolver out, and fired at Ezekiel. The bullet burned a furrow through Ezekiel's upper arm, flinging him sideways. He hit gravel, bit down on a curse, and fired back. The yard turned to thunder. Haida crawled to Ezekiel, put her back to his, and reloaded with clumsy fingers while he covered her, both of them breathing like bellows in a forge. "On me," Ezekiel rasped. "We cut left for that dry gully. What about live now? Decide virtue later." They ran low, bullets plucking at their shadows. Silas barked orders, calm, always calm, and his men fanned. The gully's lip loomed. Ezekiel shoved Ada over, then followed, landing hard and gasping as the world tilted. Up top, boots crunched and pebbles rolled into their hair. "Found 'em," someone called. Silas's silhouette crowned the lip, black against starglow. "No more running," he said, and cocked the hammer. The sound clean as a glass tapped with a spoon. A single shot rang out from the ridge behind Silas. Different angle, different rhythm, and the man next to him dropped. Who else was here in the dark desert, and whose side were they on? A horse stood on the ridge, smoke breathing from its nostrils, and atop it a figure shaped from night. Broad-shouldered, hat brim low, Winchester steady. The muzzle flashed again. Another of Silas's men spun and fell like a cut marionette. Silas turned, cursing for the first time, and fired uphill. Sparks jumped from stone. The stranger's voice floated down, old as trail dust. "Horn! You've owed me since Mesilla. Thought I'd collect where it stings." Silas hesitated, a thin slice in his composure. "Powell," he said, recognizing the shape. "Reddick will double your price if you stop shooting my men." "I'm not here for money," the stranger said. "I'm here because you laughed on a day when laughing cost other men their sons." Ezekiel's breath hitched again. He knew the story Powell meant, and it wasn't his to tell. Ada put a hand on his sleeve, brief, steadying. The gully magnified every sound, the grit sliding under boots, the rope above still creaking like memory. The air smelled of powder and sweat, and yucca bloom crushed underfoot. Silas recalculated with a mind like an adding machine. He had 3 men standing. He had Ada cornered. He had Ezekiel bleeding. But he had a rifle on his flank, and a reputation that chipped when hit too many times. He chose fury. He dropped into the gully before his men could stop him. He came low, quick, mean, firing twice, driving Ezekiel and Ada deeper behind a chunk of shale. Stone dust puffed. Ada coughed, eyes stinging. Ezekiel felt his strength bleeding into the earth and knew he was minutes from collapse. He smiled anyway, a stretch of cracked leather. "You pick your men wrong," he told Silas. "I pick them loyal," Silas said, stalking forward, the whip whispering at his side. "And I don't share my property." "I'm not," Ada said, rising from behind the rock. Voice ringing like a bell struck in clean air. Property, Silas fired. Nothing. The click sounded like a grasshopper. Empty. His eyes flicked with surprise. Just a flicker, and Ada moved. She wasn't fast, but she was certain. She slammed the barrel of her revolver into his wrist. The whip fell. Silas grabbed for her throat. She drove her knee up, catching him where men bend. He folded and came up with a knife, the blade a cold crescent moon. He slashed a clumsy arc. Ezekiel lunged and caught the knife hand. Pain lit his arm. He squeezed with everything winter and grief had taught him, and the blade wobbled. Powell's horse blew down another breath from the ridge. "Horn," he called. "You die here or you leave. Decide you're him." Silas chose neither. He twisted, broke Ezekiel's grip and charged Ada. She stepped backward into shale, ankles sliding. The world tilted. The knife flashed toward her ribs. Ezekiel took it. He moved in front of her like a door slamming in a storm. The blade bit his side, deep this time, hot-cold. He didn't shout. He turned his body, trapping Silas's wrist against his own ribs, and drove his forehead into the bridge of Silas's nose. Bone gave with a wet crunch. Silas screamed and fell. The knife clattered. Ada's hands were there, firm, taking Ezekiel's elbow, keeping him upright. Her veil now a rag at her throat, her eyes bright and furious and very alive. She kicked the knife into the dark. "Enough," she said, voice shaking only after the word was done. Silas rolled, coughing blood, eyes angry and wet. He looked up the ridge where Powell sat like a hanging judge, then at Ada, then at Ezekiel, whose shirt was blackening. He licked red from his teeth and smiled, still that sermon smile, fractured now. "You think you've changed the county," he said softly. "Reddick is a river. You're a stone. Rivers learn stones," Ezekiel said. Powell fired into the ground an inch from Silas's hand. "Mount up," he said. "Tell Reddick you ran into a flood." Silas gauged his odds and found only one that ended with sunlight. He stood, staggered, and whistled for his horse. It came, snorting. He pulled up, swayed and left without looking back, boots found again by the trail's cruel rhythm. Powell watched him go, then eased his horse down the gentler side of the ridge, Winchester stowed. Up close he had a face cut from a different kind of grief, nose broken twice, front tooth chipped. "Hart," he said, nodding. "Miss." He pushed his hat back. "Powell'll do. I don't like Horn. That's how simple I like life." Ezekiel sank to one knee. The world narrowed. Ada knelt with him, pressed her palm to the wound, felt sticky heat. "Stay with me," she said. "Please." He managed a crooked smile. "I told you," he said. Forward motion. Powell tore a strip from his own shirt and bound Ezekiel's side with a soldier's efficiency. "He'll live if he rests wrong and drinks water like it's duty," he said. "Can you ride, Hart?" "I can sit on a moving thing and not fall off," Ezekiel said. "Good enough." They moved slow toward dawn, the sky bruising to purple, then thinning to gray. Coyotes sang their jealous hymns. Ada rode beside Ezekiel, every turn of the trail showing her the land that had nearly owned her bones and would now maybe hold her seed. At the ridge behind, the rope on the cottonwood creaked for the last time when the wind scattered it. It sounded to Ada like a chapter binding itself. In Hart's yard, an anvil under a ramada, a corral, a small house with a porch that had seen laughter and quiet, Ada cleaned Ezekiel's side with trembling hands and boiled water. Powell accepted coffee with a grunt, looked east and said, "Horn'll come back with papers and more friends." "I know," Ezekiel said. Ada looked from one man to the other. "Reddick wants my land because water ignores his fences," she said. "So we do what water does. We find another way." Ezekiel's gaze found hers, older, tired, clear. "You can stay," he said, voice careful, as if he were setting a delicate horseshoe. "On your own name. Work here or move on. I'll stand with you either way until you can stand without me." She held his eyes. "I ran because I wanted a life," she said. "Not a bargain." She glanced toward the road where the first light caught dust, turning it to gold. "I think I found the start of one." Powell stood, slung his rifle, and gave them both a nod that felt like a benediction from a rough church. "I'm 3 towns north if you need a long gun with no patience," he said. "Horn will circle. Men like him always do." "I won't be a lamb again," Ada said, and tightened the knot on Ezekiel's bandage with competent, gentle strength. Later, when Ezekiel slept at last, Ada stepped onto the porch. In the stillness she could hear everything. The far herds shifting, a windmill creaking a slow hymn, boot heels of mourning men on the town road. She watched the line where sun licked night and decided this. She would file her own claim, hire her own lawyer, learn words like deed and easement until they obeyed her. She would build a fence where it made sense and pull a fence where it killed mercy. She would plant marigolds by her mother's marker. She would ride with a revolver and a prayer. When Ezekiel woke, she was there with coffee. He sat up, winced and grinned at the steam. "Do you always take in stray creatures?" She asked lightly. "I don't," he said. "I take in people who deserve a second sunrise." She looked at him a long time. "You took a knife for me." He shrugged the way men do when they can't bear praise. "Seemed like you had more years in you." Outside, a wagon rattled past, children laughing on the tailboard. Life had the gall to continue. Ada smiled at the audacity of it. "Silas will return," she said, a statement, not a fear. Ezekiel nodded. "So will we." She held his gaze. "If you were in my place," she asked softly, voice aimed at him and at the world beyond the porch, "what would you do?" In a land that pretended contracts could replace consent, Ada chose to live. In a county where power wore a preacher's smile, Ezekiel chose to stand. And a man like Silas, cut by his own certainty, chose to ride away and call it strategy. The West remembers the choices that cost blood and the ones that cost courage. Some debts you pay with coin. Some you pay by waking up and trying again. If you were in Ada's place, what would you do? Would you run farther? Or turn and claim the ground under your name? If this story gripped you, like this video and subscribe for more gritty frontier tales of justice, hope, and second chances. And if you want to see how the next battle unfolds, don't miss the next story. Subscribe now.